Evening, students. I hope you're all doing well. Uh, in our previous lecture, we were talking about Gupta administration, है ना? We were comparing it to Mauryan administration, and with this angle, we had covered central as well as provincial and local administration. Now we need to cover city administration. What do we see over here? City administration mein? Once again, the trend of localization and decentralization. Write down. During the Gupta period, comma, city administration also began exhibiting the signs of localization and decentralization. Full stop. Next point. The Damodaran copper plate inscription. The Damodaran copper plate inscription throws light on the city administration of a place called Koti Varsha. Of a place called Koti Varsha. Full stop. According to it, comma, the city was administered by a council known as Rajasthan Adhikaran. Full stop. It was headed by an official titled Vishapati or Kumar Ahmad. Vishapati or Kumar Ahmad. Full stop. It appears that this was a hereditary position. Indicating the emergence of feudalism in urban administration. Full stop. Next point लिखो. He was assisted by 4 other councillors known as बताओ. प्रथम कुलिका, प्रथम कायस्था, नगर श्रेष्ठिन एंड सर्थवाह, नगर श्रेष्ठिन एंड सर्थवाह. Full stop. Next point, main point. This is also indicative. This is also indicative of the growing influence of trade guilds, occupational groups, and caste groups in city administration. In city administration. ठीक है? Stop. Next point. The factors behind growing localism are as follows. Number one, the decline of royal authority. Number two, the rise of feudalism. Number three, the rising importance of guilds and occupational groups in controlling the urban economy. Number four, the emergence of powerful caste groups in different regions. Who wanted a greater share in the power structure. Number five, political instability due to destructive wars of succession and foreign invasions, which resulted in the decline of central prerogative. Central prerogative. Okay. So these are the important factors which were leading to the emergence of localism and regionalization of urban administration, decline of royal authority. ये हो गया city administration. Next, we have to cover the nature of the Gupta state. Now, once again, we'll be comparing it against the Mauryan state. Write down. The Gupta Empire tried to model itself, model itself after the Mauryan state, and its philosophy. Stop. Subpoint. This is evident from the theoretical aspects of Gupta kingship and the royal ideology. The king was not only the sole conductor of the political machinery, he was also a divine presence on earth, who had the responsibility to uphold dharma and ensure the welfare of his subjects. Full stop. Next point. Thus, like the Mauryans, the Guptas also tried to unite secular and spiritual power in the throne. Full stop. Next point, main point. However, in many respects, the Gupta state fell short of the Mauryan ideal. fell short of the Mauryan ideal. सब पॉइंट लिखो एक एक करके. The Gupta state never attempted to interfere in the personal lives of the subjects. Next point. It never displayed any ambition. To control the economy like the Mauryans. Next point. The territorial ambitions of the Guptas also appear to be smaller than the Mauryans. Next point. Not only that, unlike Mauryans, the Guptas preferred integration rather than suppression of political rivals. Thus resulting in diluted imperial control. ये point clear है ना? So they tried to establish give and take relationships with their rivals after defeating them, rather than completely uprooting them and incorporating their territory as directly ruled units. Okay. Next point. Unlike Mauryans, comma, the Gupta state never attempted to transform itself into a philosophical state. By outlining a policy like Dhamma. Next point. While the Mauryans actively tried to marginalize the clergy from political power, the Guptas established a deep reciprocal relationship with the clergy and used it as a pillar of support, as a pillar of support, thus increasing their dependence upon the priestly class, thus increasing their dependence upon the priestly class. ठीक है? So while overall model was the same as the Mauryans, but we see several differences, several limitations also. Take down some questions. Briefly discuss the nature of Gupta administration. So, was it highly centralized system? Question mark. Number 2, compare Gupta administration to Mauryan administration. So, highlight the similarities and differences. Number 3, underline the elements of feudalization of the polity during the Gupta age. Number 4, examine the factors behind the decentralization of polity during the Gupta age. ठीक है? Word limit for all is 200, 15 marks. एक बार देख लीजिए, अगर कहीं पे प्रॉब्लम है तो प्लीज लेट मी नो. फैक्टर्स फॉर द डिसेंट्रलाइजेशन ऑफ पॉलिटी क्या क्या होंगे? First of all, Brahmanical revival. How would this contribute to political decentralization? As we have just seen, the Gupta kings became increasingly dependent upon the legitimacy provided by the priestly class. To appease the priests, what did they do? Land grants. What was the impact of land grants? On the one hand, it led to the expansion of agriculture, which resulted in the empowerment of the priestly class. And on the other hand, by making these land grants, they were not only transferring ownership of land to an already powerful class, they were also transferring sovereign powers to them. Okay? Such as the power to impose new taxes, collect those taxes, defend their territory, to administer their territory, and to extract forced labor as well. Okay? With the expansion of agriculture, what is going to happen? These land grants were made in which regions? Already heavily populated regions or the uninhabited regions? Uninhabited regions, forest regions, so lands had to be cleared, and therefore previously economically unviable regions were now becoming economically viable. So regional political potential was also being enhanced as a result. And gradually, what is going to happen? These regionally, economically powerful and politically ambitious regions are going to defy central authority, and the already powerful rulers of the priestly uh, classes, they are going to try and assert their independence. Okay, so this is going to result in political decentralization. Even if this you can say attempt at independence would not be taken to its logical conclusion, so they may not never be able to fully break away, but they will be able to erode the authority of the king to a large degree. So the amount of control that the king enjoys in these kinds of regions, that is going to be considerably lower with the passage of time. ठीक है? तो एक तो ये फैक्टर हो जाएगा. दूसरा फैक्टर बताइए. The momentum of history, something that is often overlooked. Was the institution of making land grants something that the Guptas introduced for the first time, or had they inherited it? They inherited it. It was introduced for the first time by the Satvahans, adopted by the Kushans, and inherited by the Guptas. Okay? Land grants were becoming increasingly important, politically speaking. Then, it was during the post-Mauryan period itself that the trend of Brahmanical revival had started. This trend is going to continue growing. It was during the post-modern period itself that a new imperial ideology based on the integrative model was introduced. The defeated rulers were incorporated as feudal lords or vassals. So, tendency of feudalization and vassalage, this was already in place and continued to increase. Now, they inherited all of these institutions and practices, and the historical inertia was that these were rising trends rather than declining trends. Thirdly, you can point towards the manner of political expansion as well. What was the imperial ideology followed by the Guptas? To uproot the local dynasties or to incorporate them? Incorporate them. And this resulted in the emergence of various types of power sharing agreements or mechanisms with the regional or local elites. This led to further dilution of royal authority. Okay? A kind of reciprocal relationship emerged between the king and his previous rivals, who he had transformed into his allies. They would offer their support and loyalty to the king, and in return, what would they expect and what would the king give them? An actual share in political power. Plus recognition of their traditional or hereditary rights. And the freedom to govern their regions almost autonomously. Okay. Next, number 4. Another major factor behind the decentralizing nature of power in the Gupta age was the uncertainty of succession. Right? While the rule of primogeniture was to be followed in theory, it was hardly ever practiced. Okay? Hardly ever observed in practice. As a result, there were frequent succession disputes, which sometimes took the shape of major wars as well. And अब किसको मौका मिल जाएगा? The ambitious and powerful nobles, courtiers of the king, right? So the ambitious nobles, military officials, courtiers, and relatives, they would all get the opportunity to interfere in the succession issue. Now, out of the different sides, one would emerge victorious. However, the victorious ruler, the victorious prince, would now have to appease all those people, would have to reward all those people who had helped him win the throne. Otherwise, they could withdraw their support, his position would become endangered. Right? And through this interference, their influence over the new ruler would be considerably increased. Another factor, what was happening to the caste system during this period? Were the number of castes growing or remaining the same? They were growing rapidly. So, caste proliferation also played an important role in political decentralization. Kaise? In different regions, different occupational groups would be assigned a different caste status. Okay? Now, caste to begin with was an occupational and social group. But as the number of people with the same caste began realizing that their interests are aligned with each other, caste also became a political grouping. Okay? It transformed into a group with shared political aspirations. Okay? Now, what would be the nature of these aspirations? To establish their own state, and if that is not possible, at least to autonomously control the resources being generated by the members of this caste group, or to increase the command of this caste group over the resources. So this is going to bring their political aspirations into conflict with some other groups, maybe into conflict even with the king, okay, the ruler. This led to conflict of interest with other groups and even rulers. And how would this conflict be resolved? Either through war they would be subjugated, or through some kind of political arrangement, even if it happens after a war, some power sharing will be created. Okay? Conflict resolution would happen through war or through an agreement. resulting in diluted royal control. ठीक है. Further, another contributing factor, the beginning of foreign invasions from the mid 5th century onwards. Which tribe from Central Asia began invading North India? The Hunas. ठीक है. Now, as the Hunas began invading, what was the Gupta response? Military engagement. So, military engagement increased and became extremely important. What will this result in? In two things simultaneously. First of all, as military officials and commanders become increasingly important, they would demand more and more land grants, resulting in the emergence of military feudalism or growth of military feudalism. Secondly, the Gupta's own forces, what would be their focus now? To maintain control within the empire or to defend the empire from external forces? Defend the empire. So, military control declined as defense became the priority. So, as the control of the Guptas over their local feudatories and caste groups were weakened, what would they do? They would sense weakness and an opportunity. They would assert independence or demand even greater autonomy. We want these additional privileges, otherwise, we are not going to remain within the kingdom. We are not going to support you against the Huna invasions, etc. These kinds of things. Okay? So these are the factors that were responsible for decentralizing polity. So examine the factors behind the decentralization of polity during the Gupta age. हमें इनकी बात करनी. क्या क्या? Brahmanical revival. Secondly, momentum of history, historical inertia tha. Thirdly, manner of political expansion, integrative model. Uncertainty of succession, which gave an opportunity to the important courtiers to interfere and increase their influence. Fifthly, caste proliferation. And lastly, foreign invasions, resulting in both the growth of military feudalism as well as the decline of military control. हो जाएगा? बाकी questions? Briefly discuss the nature of Gupta administration. Was it highly centralized? Straightforward question. I hope you'll be able to answer. Compare Gupta administration to Mauryan administration. Highlight the similarities and differences. ये भी हो जाना चाहिए. Underline the elements of feudalization of polity during the Gupta age. This we have covered in detail. ये हो गया Gupta's का administration. Next, we need to talk about the Gupta economy. Now, since the beginning of the महाजनपद एज क्या ट्रेंड देख रहे थे हम? Growth in agriculture as well as urban development, they were both growing simultaneously. So this is going to happen during the later Vedic age also, during the Mahajanpad age also, during the Mauryan age also, during the post-Mauryan age also, and what is going to be there during the Gupta age? Well, on the one hand, agrarian economy is going to keep on expanding uninterrupted from the middle of the Gupta age. We are going to see the disruption of local economy. First, a period of stagnation followed by slow decline and then a rapid decline. Okay? The Gupta age. Now we need to see कि इसके पीछे factors क्या हैं. What were the factors behind the continued growth of the agrarian economy, and what were the factors behind the stagnation and decline of the urban economy following the from the middle of the Gupta age onwards. ठीक, तो ये जो ग्रीन वाला है, this is rural economy. This orange one, this is urban economy. Same, rural economy, agrarian economy, we are using interchangeably. ठीक है, लिखो. The Gupta economy exhibited a mixed picture. Full stop. Next point. Agriculture continued to grow. Continuously throughout this period, or continued to grow throughout this period. Next point लिखो. However, the urban economy showed the signs of both continuity and change. Sub point within this, right? It continued to flourish in the first half of the Gupta age. But began stagnating from the mid 5th century onwards, before declining sharply. Next sub point. This change was brought about by a combination of internal and external forces. Internal and external forces. Internal and external forces. First, we'll talk about the rural economy or agrarian economy. Write down. Agriculture continued on the path of sustained growth due to the following factors. Number one, the proliferation of land grants contributed to agrarian expansion Subpoint. Most land grants were made in frontier regions forests or unpopulated zones ठीक है, full stop. Next subpoint, the Amar Kosh talks about 12 different kinds of agricultural land. What does this indicate? Importance of agriculture was growing if Amar Singh is talking about it. And secondly, that these were different categories of lands that were granted to different officials or priests. Okay, write down. This indicates the growth of land grants as well as the growing importance of agriculture. Number two, अगला factor, the expansion of irrigation. लिखो. हाँ, इसमें सब पॉइंट लिखो. और या फिर इसी में कंटिन्यू करो. The expansion of irrigation also contributed to agricultural growth फुल स्टॉप. सब पॉइंट लिखो. ड्यूरिंग द reign of Skandgupta, the Sudarshan lake was once again repaired by the provincial officials. By the provincial officials. The Junagadh rock at Girnar also contains an inscription of Skandgupta's reign. It informs us that two officials, Prandat and Chandrapalit, had together repaired the damages done to the Sudarshan lake. They were the provincial officials of Skandgupta. Next sub point likho. Inscriptions of Harsha's period as well as the Harsh Charit mention the use of the Ghati Yantra. What was this? That is the water wheel. Later on, it would be called by other names such as Sakya or Rahat. Okay? Turks would call it Rahat or Sakya. क्या पर्पज होता था घटी यंत्र का? टू लिफ्ट वाटर. ठीक है. तो एक रीजन हो गया सस्टेन ग्रोथ का, प्रोलिफरेशन ऑफ लैंड ग्रांट्स, जिसकी वजह से एक्सपेंशन ऑफ एग्रीकल्चर हो रहा था. दूसरा एक्सपेंशन ऑफ इरिगेशन. नेक्स्ट सब पॉइंट इसी में लिख लो. द बृहत संहिता and the Amarkosh also describe several scientific techniques for irrigation. Several scientific techniques for irrigation. ठीक है. Third factor behind sustained growth of agriculture क्या है? Rising crop diversity and technological know-how. Rising crop diversity and technological know-how. लिखो. Sub point. The Amarkosh mentions a large variety of both wild and domesticated plants. Both wild and domesticated plants. Stop. Next sub point. The Brihat Samhita also describes the technique of grafting. which would have definitely helped in crop propagation. In crop propagation, grafting, which would have definitely helped in crop propagation. ठीक है, नेक्स्ट लिखो नंबर 4. Brahmanical revival also contributed to agricultural growth in the following ways. The following ways. Stop. Sub point. लिखो. It became the basis for the growing number of land grants. Next sub point. It provided legitimacy to the institution or to the practice of Vishti or Vrishti. Vrishti. Stop. क्या है ये? The right to extract forced labor. ठीक है. Next sub point. It gave legitimacy. It gave legitimacy to the institution of Begar. What is Begar? Bonded labor. बेगार को एक्सेप्टेंस मिल गया. नेक्स्ट सब पॉइंट. It also contributed to the emergence of the concept of अपधर्म. अपधर्म. What is अपधर्म? This was part and parcel of the intellectual framework of कलयुग. ठीक है, क्योंकि कलयुग आ गया है, people are not able to observe the varnashram dharma system. Therefore, upper varnas could be permitted to adopt or to follow those occupations which they are not prescribed for doing. For example, Brahmins and Kshatriyas could become landowners and begin and engage in agriculture. Okay? Upper Varnas, it allowed upper Varnas to take up agriculture. Did the members of the lower Varna also enjoy this freedom? No, they were not. They were restricted. ठीक है, क्या लिखा आपने? Apadharma, through which members of the upper Varnas were allowed to adopt agriculture as their chief occupation. adopt agriculture as their chief occupation. Next sub point. Further, with the proliferation of castes, growing untouchability, and rising restrictions on the lower varnas comma, Brahmanism created the platform for the growth of the agrarian labor market. The agrarian labor market. Proliferation of castes, growing untouchability, and rising restrictions on the lower varnas. How would that contributed to enlarging the labor market? देखो अब क्या होगा that people who engage in craft production, they would be given the status of untouchables. तो शूद्रास और वैश्यास को क्या बोला जाएगा? Stay away from craft production. If craft production declines, what is going to happen to trade? That is automatically going to decline. जब production नहीं हो रहा है तो supply कैसे होगा? So trade cannot take place. Vaishyas who are primarily engaged in trade and craft production, they will be forced to take up agriculture, right? Further, untouchability grow कर रहा है और castes का number grow कर रहा है. So different classes of Vaishyas and Shudras are also going to be assigned specific tasks within the agrarian economy. ठीक है? And they are going to be very strictly regulated कि आप इसके अलावा और कोई काम नहीं कर सकते. And this would mean that the agrarian economy would never be disrupted. So revival of Brahmanism also played a very important role in the growth of the agrarian economy in this manner. ठीक है? However, everywhere else or till now, what had we seen? With the growth of agriculture, क्या होता था? Agricultural surplus used to increase, and that provided the basis for growing trade, craft production, and urbanization. Is the growth of agriculture during the Gupta age also going to have the same effect? No. While the surplus would increase, who would own all this surplus? Would the state own all of this? नया surplus generate हो रहा है, वो कहाँ पे generate हो रहा है? In the lands that have been granted to the Brahmins and the officials, right? And ये जितना भी surplus generate हो रहा है, that is being appropriated by this new class of elites. ठीक है? So it was appropriated by the rural elite. And what would they invest it towards, or what would they spend this towards? Towards consumption or towards production? Towards consumption. So consumption increased, and apart from this, major chunk would be spent on military expenditure because they want to defend the area that has been granted to them. Military expenditure would increase. So none of their expenditure is leading to more production. Okay. So both of these are, this is a kind of unproductive expenditure. Is it going to create the demand for manufactured goods? Nahi hoga, right? And all the goods that are needed, they were locally assembled, locally produced. And this is going to lead to the localization of the economy, and self-sufficient village economy is going to emerge. ठीक है, राइट डाउन, इतना लिख लिया ना. तो हम क्या डिस्कस कर रहे थे? वी वर लुकिंग एट द एग्रेरियन इकोनॉमी. हमने एक फीचर डिस्कस किया था दैट एक्सपेंशन हो रहा, सस्टेन्ड ग्रोथ हो रहा था. वी हैड सीन द फैक्टर्स बिहाइंड इट. व्हाट वर द फैक्टर्स अंडरलाइंड? फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल द एक्सपेंशन ऑफ land grants, second of the expansion of irrigation, third the proliferation of the revival of Brahmanism, right? And fourth, rising crop diversity and technological improvements. Okay, technological know-how. So these things we have seen. We have also seen how revival of Brahmanism was contributing to the growth of agriculture. Now continuing with the other features of agrarian economy during the Gupta age, or rural economy during the Gupta age. Write down. While economic growth was registered in the rural economy, comma, it did not necessarily result in prosperity for the cultivators. So stop. Sub point. In fact, economic inequality became a prominent feature of the Gupta rural economy. Full stop. Sub point. This was due to. As per sub point. This was due to the growing utilization of the rural economy as a consequence of land grants. Full stop. Sub point. The feudalization of the economy also resulted in growing economic stratification, growing economic stratification. ठीक है, तो पूरी एक रूरल हायरार्की, इकोनॉमिक हायरार्की इमर्ज हो जाएगी. सबसे ऊपर होगा जो फ्यूडल लॉर्ड होगा, द पर्सन हु हैज रिसीव्ड द लैंड ग्रांट्स. बिलो हिम द ओवरसीयर्स एंड मैनेजर्स ऑफ द लैंड्स. बिलो देम देयर एजेंट्स एंड सब एजेंट्स. बिलो देम द लोकल विलेज chiefs who are landowners in their own right and who control the other peasants, and at the lowest level are going to be the peasants themselves. Write down. नेक्स्ट सब पॉइंट लिखो. द अमर कोश mentions several classes involved in agriculture, such as involved in agriculture, such as क्षेत्र स्वामी, महीपति, कृषक एंड बेगार. कृषक एंड बेगार. ठीक है. So while wealth was being created, it was being concentrated in the hands of these groups. ठीक है. People such as the Kshetra Swamis or the Mahipatis, these were the people who had been granted that particular piece of land, or their agents and sub-agents. Sub-infeudation is also going to take place. Whereas ये जो producer class है, they will be left with very little, as they have to satisfy the revenue demand or tax demand of the superior feudal lords. ठीक है. And because of sub-infeudation होगा क्या, that within the agrarian structure कई सारी layers develop हो जाएंगी. The bulk of the population that is involved in agriculture, that is the producer class, they are actually doing the work of economic production, agricultural production. और ये जो बाकी सारी classes हैं वो क्या कर रहे हैं, they are simply extracting their share of the surplus. So this class that is going to take its own commission out of the tax collected. This class that is also going to take its commission. This class is also going to take its commission, and this will demand its share in the total surplus. Okay? The entire burden is going to fall on the peasants. This is known as the cascading burden of taxation. Okay? Write down. The next point. The agricultural growth witnessed during this period may therefore have adversely affected the interests of the producing class, since they had to bear the cascading burden of taxation. Since they had to bear the cascading burden of taxation. ठीक है. नेक्स्ट सब पॉइंट. rising economic inequality was also being caused by social factors, by social factors, namely the revival of Brahmanism, full stop, subpoint. This contributed, this contributed, this contributed to the legitimization of, to the legitimization of forced labor and bonded labor, forced labor and bonded labor. So, next subpoint. The Junagadh rock inscription of Rudradaman, along with the donative inscriptions of the Gupta period, along with the donative inscriptions of the Gupta period, indicate that Begari was becoming increasingly popular, was becoming increasingly popular. Full stop. ठीक है. So Gupta period, sorry, रुद्रदमन का जो Junagadh rock inscription है, that gives the first written evidence of the practice of forced labor, vrishti. But Gupta period में there are a number of donative inscriptions or votive inscriptions which empower the people who have been granted the land grants to extract forced labor and to transform peasants into bonded labor, begar. Okay. Further, the literary texts such as the Brihat Samhita and the Kama Sutra, etc., they also talk about the practice of begari. So this means that it was a growing trend. And इसका खामियाजा किसको भुगतना पड़ेगा? इस क्लास को, जो कल्टिवेटर क्लास है. ठीक है. नेक्स्ट पॉइंट लिखो. नेक्स्ट मेन पॉइंट. The impact of feudalism or impact of feudalization, the impact of feudalization of the agrarian structure was complex and profound. Was complex and profound. Full stop. Subpoint. On one hand, it contributed to higher productivity. It contributed to higher productivity. How? We have already seen this. Okay? Through land grants, through the improvement of irrigation, through Brahmanical revival, through the improvement of technology, through the improvement of better crop diversity, etc. So all this can be linked to the growth of feudalization, because now the land grantees were undertaking all these activities on their own initiative, since improvement of agriculture and expansion of agriculture was in their own interests. क्या लिखा है आपने लाइन? On the one hand, it contributed to higher productivity, comma, on the other hand, it may also have it may also have harmed productivity. Harmed productivity. How? कैसे? See, are these developments going to be confined to any particular region or any particular pocket, or are these developments going to take place simultaneously in all parts of India? All parts of India. Therefore, different regions, they are all going to experience the same level of economic growth. And what is going to be the result of this? All these regions are going to inch closer and closer towards realizing their true political potential. Okay? In fact, since these developments were going on simultaneously, most of them came or became mature political entities or economic entities which could sustain an independent polity around the same time. What is going to happen as a result? यहाँ का जो फ्यूडल लॉर्ड है वो चाहेगा कि मैं ये वाला लैंड भी ले लूं, ये वाला लैंड भी ले लूं. यहाँ के फ्यूडल लॉर्ड्स क्या चाहेंगे? मैं इसका लैंड भी ले लूं, राइट? एंड दिस इज गोइंग टू रिजल्ट इन कॉन्फ्लिक्ट. ठीक है, एक तो ये है, एंड दैट इज गोइंग टू बी हार्मफुल फॉर एग्रीकल्चरल प्रोडक्टिविटी. इट विल डिसरप्ट प्रोडक्शन. सेकेंड फैक्टर क्या है? दैट नाउ a very clear economic hierarchy which overlaps with the Varna and caste hierarchy that has been created. Right? At the bottom are the producers, and at the top are the elites, and these are the consumers. Natural tendency for both of these classes would be what? To appropriate as large a portion of the agrarian surplus with themselves as possible. Right? Producers would want the level of taxation should be as low as possible. Best thing would be no taxation at all. And the elites, the feudal elements, what would they want? Higher taxation, higher levies, leave nothing with the producers, keep them completely under control. Now, for a particular period of time, on the basis of military power, these classes would be able to keep this class subdued. But ultimately, इसका reaction होगा कि नहीं होगा? क्या reaction होगा? Rebellion. Right? And we have evidence of certain rebellions taking place. For example, the Kalabhar rebellion from the 8th century onwards in the region of the deep south, Chola, Chera, Pandya, etc. इनको affect किया उसने. In Bengal region, Kevartas का rebellion 7th century में, that also took place during the post-Gupta period. So this means that while feudalism was resulting in the growth of agriculture, it was also contributing to the decline of agriculture. So, क्या लिखा है? The impact of feudalization of the agrarian structure on the rural economy was complex and profound. On the one hand, it resulted in higher productivity, and on the other, it may also have contributed to, or it may also have harmed productivity. Next, और सब point लिखो 1 and 2 करके. Number 1, it promoted the regionalization of the economy, thus inducing political competition and conflict. Thus inducing political competition and conflict between political competition and conflict between agriculturally productive regions. agriculturally productive regions. Next point number 2. The rising exploitation of the cultivator class by the elites would also induce a social conflict, a social conflict or class conflict. Example, Kalabhar rebellion, 7th century. And Kaivarta rebellion, Kaivarta, Kaivarta rebellion, 8th century. Right? But one thing we see is that while पहला वाला चीज तो हुआ that the different economically productive regions started to compete against each other. Second वाला चीज भी हुआ लेकिन बहुत कम हुआ. We are comparing over here obviously with some other regions, specifically Western Europe. In Western Europe, what we see is that जो class rebellions हैं, they are going to be extremely powerful and extremely frequent. In the case of India, we get very few instances of class rebellions. एक कालावार मिलता है, दूसरा कैवर्ता मिलता है, इसके अलावा कुछ नहीं मिला है. Write down next point, main point. However, it is interesting to note that instances of peasant rebellions in India are relatively fewer in comparison to European history. What is the inference that historians have drawn from this particular detail? What was the cause for these class rebellions? Economic exploitation, right? And inference क्या मिलता है कि कम rebellions हुए तो economic exploitation भी कम रहा होगा as compared to Western Europe. Write down. Same point में continue कर लो. As such, some historians have suggested that India never experienced the same kind of social tensions, same level of social tensions as feudal Europe. And on this basis, they have challenged the very idea of feudalism in India. Europe-like feudalism never existed in India. क्यों? क्योंकि the control of the people who had been granted the land over the local peasants, over the agrarian labor, was never as strong, never as strict as those of their European counterparts. ठीक है? तो इंडिया में क्या बोलते हैं? They have said that neither feudalism nor its counterpart, that is the practice of serfdom, existed or were never entirely entrenched. In fact, instead of that, the Indian peasantry constituted what can be considered to be a free peasant society. Meaning, they enjoyed several freedoms. They were not under the thumb of the feudal lord. They could cultivate their own land. First of all, they owned their own land. They could cultivate their land. They could decide what to grow, how much to grow, when not to grow, etc. They could also trade freely the goods that they produced. The burden of taxation on them was also lower. And if they wanted, they could sell off their land and move to a new location. Okay? Europe may they did not have this kind of freedom. First of all, the serfs of Europe were never landowners. They were always part of the landed estate. They were considered part of the property of the landowner. तो लैंड के साथ उनको लेबर फ्री में मिलता था, उसके ऊपर इनबिल्ट होता था. They did not have the same kind of freedoms. First of all, they could never leave the estate and go to any other place. They could never change their occupation. They could never, or for example, if the landlord in Europe decided to transfer his land, it would also automatically transfer the ownership of the serfs that came with the land. इंडिया में ये केस था ही नहीं. ठीक है, तो क्या लिखा है आपने लास्ट? As feudal Europe, India never experienced the same level of social tensions as feudal Europe. Full stop. On this basis, it has been suggested that the agrarian structure during the Gupta period was characterized by the presence of a free peasant society, characterized by the presence of a free peasant society rather than serfdom. A free peasant society rather than serfdom. Okay, so this is the rural economy. Take down a question. Delineate the factors responsible for the sustained agricultural growth during the Gupta age. Full stop. Throw light on the characteristics of the agrarian structure of this period. Full stop. 200 words, 15 marks. हो जाएगा. स्ट्रेट फॉरवर्ड क्वेश्चन है. Factors responsible for sustained agricultural growth during the Gupta age. We have already discussed this. Characteristics of the agrarian structure of this period. क्या देखने के लिए मिलता है? Rising economic inequality, sub-infeudation, the exploitation of the productive classes by the feudal classes, the transference of special privileges and rights to the feudal class. However, we also see some other things. For example, the absence or the rarity of feudal rebellions or class rebellions proves that serfdom was not well entrenched. While begar and forced labor were used in the Gupta agrarian economy, it was a marginal practice. It was not a widespread practice, right? Because अगर वो होता तो frequent rebellions भी होते, but we do not see that. Therefore, it may also be the case that एक चीज नॉर्मेटिव है और दूसरा चीज प्रैक्टिकल है, आइडियलिस्टिक एंड रियलिस्टिक. रियलिस्टिक पिक्चर वाज दैट प्री प्रेजेंट सोसाइटी. ठीक है, दैट इज द आइडिया. नेक्स्ट, ये हो गया द अग्रेरियन और रूरल इकोनॉमी. नेक्स्ट वी हैव टू टॉक अबाउट द अर्बन इकोनॉमी. व्हाट आर वी गोइंग टू सी? फर्स्ट फेज में कंटिन्यूड एक्सपेंशन एंड देन लेटर फेज में decline, stagnation and decline. Write down. The urban economy continued on its upward trajectory during the first half of the Gupta age. First half of the Gupta age, when we are saying, brackets में लिख लो 300 to 450 AD. Full stop. Contemporary sources such as Kalidas, Shudrak, Vatsayan, Vishnu Sharma, and Vishakha Dutt, along with Faheen, paint a picture of a flourishing urban environment. With busy trade and production related activities. Full stop. So now we need to talk about the specific sectors of the urban economy during this first phase. First of all, craft production. Keep the subheading, craft production. लिखो. Pottery, metallurgy, arms industry, manufacturing of agricultural implements, furniture, and metallic utensils. Along with textile, were the main drivers of local demand. Not local but domestic demand. सब पॉइंट लिखो. और नेक्स्ट मेन पॉइंट लिख सकते हो, टेक्सटाइल प्रोडक्शन was expanding with the growth of cotton, silk as well as wool. मथुरा, बनारस, काशी, बनारस and Kamrup Assam were the most important centers of textiles. सब पॉइंट लिखो. The Mandsaur inscription of Yashovarman. He was one of the post Harshvardhan rulers who ruled over Kannauj. ठीक है, powerful ruler. The Mandsaur inscription of, क्या नाम है, of Yashovarman's period mentions the presence of a prominent guild of silk weavers from Lata. Lata was in Gujarat. From Lata. So it informs us that initially this guild was from Lata, but then they had migrated and settled in the region of Mandsaur. ठीक है, क्या, कामरूप असम में, असम को कामरूप बोलते थे पहले. ठीक है, क्या लिखा आपने? हाँ, ऑफ सिल्क वीवर्स फ्रॉम लता. नेक्स्ट सब पॉइंट लिखो. The Ajanta cave paintings provide glimpses of fine embroidered cloth as well. Fine embroidered cloth as well. Next main point. Metallurgy witnessed significant improvements as indicated by the high quality of Gupta coins and the Mehrauli iron pillar. Gupta coins and the Mehrauli iron pillar. Full stop. Sub point. Magad continued to remain an important center of the iron industry. ठीक है, जेम्स एंड ज्वेलरी मेकिंग कहाँ पे? गुजरात, राइट. सो जो पोस्ट मॉडर्न पीरियड में देखा था, दैट सेम पैटर्न इज गोइंग टू कंटिन्यू. तो ये हो गया क्राफ्ट्स प्रोडक्शन. नेक्स्ट नंबर 2, ट्रेड. Both internal and external trade expanded. during this period. Full stop. Next point. Internal trade was driven by A B C करके लिखो. A, rural growth and the enlargement of surplus. B, political unification and the removal of internal trade barriers. Political unification and the removal of internal trade barriers. C, the growing influence and independence of guilds. Next, T या 4 क्या लिखा है? ABC. D, write down. Favorable policies of Gupta rulers who encouraged trade by reducing taxes upon it. E, a flourishing money lending industry, which was crucial for funding trade. F, the emergence of a circular exchange between traders and financial institutions such as bankers and the Sangha. On the one hand, traders would borrow money from the financial institutions such as bankers and the Sangha. This money would be invested towards trade, the purchase and sale of goods. They would get huge profits as a result of expanding trade and low taxes, and a portion of their profits they would send back to the financial institutions in the form of loan repayments, interests, as well as donations. Okay? So there was ample liquidity in the market at all times. Okay? So these were the factors for rising internal trade. Next point likho. Next main point. External trade also continued growing Main point. External trade also continued growing due to the following reasons. The following reasons also continued growing due to the following reasons. ABCD करके A. India was situated in the middle of the ancient Silk Route. In the middle of the ancient Silk Route, which connected prosperous civilizations of Europe, Asia, and Africa. Europe, Asia, and Africa. The major chunk of this trade was passing through India. Okay? Clear? So obviously it is going to flourish. Next, trade is going to flourish. Next, number 2, B. The Guptas also cultivated cordial relations with long distance traders by providing them special privileges and tax concessions. Special privileges and tax concessions. Okay? So these people were eager to come to India. India became a major trade destination. See, the general atmosphere of tolerance. The general atmosphere of tolerance was also conducive to the growth of external trade. Was also conducive to the growth of external trade. So outsiders were accepted, welcomed, and even celebrated in Indian society, right? So once again, they would be eager to come here. They were given extra security, special privileges, etc. So India was a very attractive trade destination for them. D. India occupied a unique position in the global supply chain. In the global supply chain. क्या unique position? First of all, it is acting as the distributor of Eastern goods coming from Southeast Asia and China to the Western world, to the civilizations of Europe and Africa. And it is performing the same function with respect to products coming from Western Europe and Africa for the Chinese and Southeast Asians. एक तो डिस्ट्रीब्यूटर का काम कर रहा है, साथ में प्रोड्यूसर का काम भी कर रहा है, ठीक है. Its own native manufacturing was strong enough to sustain a flourishing trade. Write down. It played the role of a distributor, of Eastern goods like spices and silk to the West. At the same time, it also contributed directly to the process of value addition, to the process of value addition. Due to its developed handcrafts industries. Stop. Example: silk, cotton, ivory, gems and jewelry. Comma. Carved wooden objects. Carved wooden objects. Comma. Iron weapons. Brass armor. Comma. Sandalwood and perfumes. Sandalwood and perfumes, etc. ठीक है, कितने हुए हैं? डी तक, ई लिखो, ई. The Gupta age, the Gupta age also witnessed significant improvements in maritime trade due to which factor? The emergence of larger, swifter, and more robust ships due to the improvements in shipbuilding. Shipbuilding. Stop. Contemporary Indian and Roman sources. Contemporary Indian and Roman sources talk about Indian shipbuilders who constructed massive ships capable of carrying 500 people. Capable of carrying 500 people. Full stop. ठीक है, तो these were the reasons for the growth of external trade. हमने यहाँ पे क्या डिस्कस किया है? इंपोर्ट्स या एक्सपोर्ट्स? एक्सपोर्ट्स. ठीक है, ज्यादातर. नेक्स्ट मेन पॉइंट लिखो. While India's external trade was highly favorable, comma, some goods were also imported from overseas. Stop. A point. The chief import were horses from Persia and Arabia. from Persia and Arabia. Full stop. What was the need for horses? Nature of warfare was changing. Elephants were being replaced by cavalry as the most important unit within the military. Likho. This was a result of the growing importance of cavalry in warfare. Full stop. Apart from this, next point, apart from this, raw silk and uncut gems were imported from China and Southeast Asia respectively. From China and Southeast Asia respectively. Full stop. Next subpoint. In India, they were obviously polished and processed, and then they were sold to the Roman Empire. Okay. Next subpoint. Small quantities of expensive Roman wine was imported as well. Full stop. Next main point. However, the bulk of Rome's trade with India was balanced with the import of precious metals. Okay? The bulk of Rome's trade with India was balanced through the import of precious metals. Rome had to send gold and silver to balance its trade. Precious metals to India. Okay? So, urban economy first phase mein we have seen craft production as well as trade. Next important element is monetization. Write down number 3. Monetary system. Did the Guptas have a well-developed monetary system? Yes, write down. The Guptas possessed a sophisticated monetary system based on trimetallism. That means coins made of 3 different metals were in circulation. Full stop. Subpoint. They issued the largest number of gold coins in ancient India. Known as dinar. Stop. Next point. Chandragupta the second also issued silver rupakas. Silver rupakas. However, these were not widely circulated. These were not widely circulated. Next point. Copper coins known as masikas were used primarily for local trade. Primarily for local trade. ठीक है? Next main point लिखो. However, some elements of decline in trade and urbanization are apparent from the coinage of the early Gupta age. From the coinage of the early Gupta age. Full stop. Now, although the Guptas issued the largest number of gold coins, were their coins as pure as the gold coins issued by the Kushans? No. Write down. Subpoint. Gupta gold coinage exhibited steady debasement from the early periods, indicating what? Prosperity was high or low or decreasing? It was decreasing, indicating अर्बन प्रॉस्पेरिटी डिक्रीज कब करेगा? जब ट्रेड कम हो जाएगा, राइट? इंडिकेटिंग falling prosperity, falling urban prosperity and trade. Stop. Next point. Further, comma, the number of copper coins in circulation were fewer than the post-Mauryan age. What does this mean? Local trade, local exchange, was that speeding up or slowing down? Slowing down, indicating the slowing down of local trade. Stop. Next up, main point. These trends suggest the gradual feudalization of the Gupta economy from the early Gupta age itself. And later Gupta age में क्या होगा? Full-fledged feudalization is going to manifest itself. Okay? So this was the urban economy of the Gupta age during the first phase, the first half of the Gupta age. Second half of the Gupta age economy, कल की class में. Any doubts? No? चलिए. Thank you for your time.